Welcome, everybody, to the 7th Annual Post 692 Memorial Day program. I am Lieutenant Colonel Sheldon Goldberg. I'm the Post Adjutant, and I will be the MC for the program today. So I definitely want to welcome you all, and I want to ask, before we get to that part, that when we are done, please stick around and listen to Voices of Vets. I think you're going to like what you hear, and we always like to have them here. So if I may, Cassie, Star Spangled Banner, please. Would you all please rise for the Star Spangled Banner and then the Pledge of Allegiance.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming. And the rockets we the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
And if you'll remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And I'll look to call upon Rabbi Kafka for the invocation.
We gather today to honor the great men and women of the United States Armed Forces lost in the line of duty. We pay tribute to the sacrifice they made, the ultimate sacrifice. Remember these brave heroes, to whom we are eternally indebted. We seek means to ensure that the values for which they sacrificed their lives are protected and upheld. It is by living with a faith in a higher authority and remembering our duties to our Creator that we ensure that as humans, we are living by pristine values and unbroken integrity. Indeed, our pledge states, we are one nation under God, because part and parcel of living the liberties which make America so great is our belief that there's a Creator of all of existence. So to their holy souls on high we say, your sacrifice was not in vain. The freedoms we enjoy today to openly practice our beliefs, to follow the Torah and its commandments that they sacrificed, that are given to us 3,335 years ago on Mount Sinai, we recognize are all thanks to the men and women of the United States Armed Forces who committed their very lives for our freedoms. And so by adding one mitzvah, one act of goodness and kindness, helping someone in need, doing a mitzvah added to our week, whether it be wrapping the tefillin or lighting the Shabbat candles, we honor their souls and their sacrifice. And before I begin with the blessing, let me say, as we enter into a political season, let us remember that we are one nation, and as Jews, we are one people. And while we may differ and have very different opinions, and sometimes the conversation gets very heated, we must remember that brotherly connection. And we learn this from those who served and those who continue to serve. Politics is very important to them, yet it's secondary to their duty to the United States. And if we can learn anything from the sacrifice that these men and women have made, it is to put our brothers and our sisters in front of everything else. If you're able, please stand. Almighty God, Master of the universe, Creator of the heaven and earth, creator of all mankind, sustainer of all life. We ask that your blessings descend upon us as we gather here today. We thank you for the opportunity to once again in freedom assemble in honor to honor the fallen heroes of our nation's armed forces. May we never forget those who made the supreme sacrifice to secure for our nation the blessings of life, liberty, and justice for all. May their souls be a blessing forever. May our observance be a timely reminder that our freedoms was purchased at a high cost and should not be taken for granted. May we find the strength we need to remain true to living through faith in you, Almighty, thus ensure that our values of truth, morality remain forever strong. May we always have the courage to live as proud Jews, if not for our own sake, for theirs. Bless the families and friends of those we are honoring here, and bless the veterans who have brought with them here today memories, stories, and tears. May the words of our prophet Isaiah be realized. Nations will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. Amen.
Please be seated. I'd like to ask our commander, Mike Glick, to come up and give a word of welcome.
I want to thank everyone who came out to this hopefully beautiful day. Let's see if the weather holds out. But solemn day before, the day before Memorial Day, to remember service members who are no longer with us. I'd like to especially thank Councilmember Friedson, the Ukrainian American Veterans Post 26, JWV Executive Director Ken Berman, excuse me, and JCC CEO Josh Bender for joining us for this commemorate this day. As some of you may know, Memorial Day has roots dating back to the end of the Civil War, which claimed more lives than any conflict in U.S. history, requiring the establishment of the country's first national cemeteries. By the late 1860s, Americans throughout the country started to hold springtime tributes to fallen soldiers, fallen service members in many towns and cities, decorating their graves with flowers and reciting prayers. On May 20th, 1868, more than 5,000 participants of the first ever National Decoration Day, as it was originally called, decorated the graves of 20,000 soldiers buried at Arlington National Cemetery across the river from Washington, D.C. 100 years after the first National Decoration Day, Congress passed the Uniform Monday Holiday Act in 1968, which established Memorial Day as the last Monday in May in order to create a 3-day weekend for federal employees. That change went effective into 1971, and it also declared Memorial Day a federal holiday. So while this holiday is designated as a national holiday to remember, mourn, and celebrate the lives of men and women who valiantly served in the U.S. Armed Forces that are tragically no longer with us, over time this holiday has become known to be the unofficial start of summer, becoming synonymous with barbecues, pool parties, and can't-miss sales. But I want to thank all of you for coming here today to recognize the true purpose of Memorial Day, to remember those service members who have left us, especially those who paid the ultimate sacrifice. So with that in mind, I'd like for us to take a moment of silence to remember those brave souls that you may know, you may not have known, who have no longer with us, who have served this country so valiantly, who are no longer with us. Thank you.
I'd now like to ask Josh Bender, the CEO of the Bender JCC, to come forward and say a few words of welcome.
Thank you, Sheldon. Thank you, Mike, and thank you everyone for coming out. It really gives us great pleasure here at the Bender JCC to convene this special program, and I want to share my gratitude to our Jewish war veterans, Post 692, for what they do every year, bringing us together to raise up this important weekend, this important moment in our calendar. It also gives us great satisfaction to have this beautiful memorial here, front and center at the Bender JCC as a reminder every single day. I love watching all generations spend time in this area, not just this weekend, but throughout the entire year. And I want to thank all of you for coming out today to mark this special occasion. And it's just really wonderful to see all generations coming together today, even as little as maybe 6 months old, 9 months old. So very beautiful. And thank you so much for gathering. And thank you again to our Jewish war veterans for bringing us all together.
Before we introduce our keynote speaker, I want to say a few words about our special guests, members of Ukrainian American Veterans Post 26. And I'll introduce Colonel Dr. Rashold Nisizhuk, U.S. Army retired, representing the post commander, Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Yaromir Orishkevich, the United States Air Force Reserve retired. For Memorial Day, we remember the sacrifices of all military personnel. Inevitably, we think first of those fellow citizens who paid the ultimate price. But today we wanted to pay special tribute to those allies fighting for their independence and freedom against a cruel dictator who has invaded their country. What has happened to Ukraine, particularly since February 2022, has given the Ukrainians reason to look back and see that the battle they are facing today has put them in a position not unlike those Jews almost 2 millennia ago who stood off an overwhelming force of Romans at Masada, and those Jews who just 80 years ago stood up in the Warsaw Ghetto against the superior Nazi force bent on their extermination. History, however, does not always repeat itself, and courage and fortitude of the Ukrainians will not accept defeat. As the Wall Street Journal recently wrote, this fight finds parallels in the Hanukkah story, in Judah Maccabee's stunning victory over the Seleucid Empire in the 2nd century BC. Mr. Zelensky has for 14 months, I guess 15 months now, kept at bay an army believed to be one of the world's most powerful. It is with these thoughts that we welcome the members of the Ukrainian American Veterans Post 26, and that's Dr. Nisizhuk to say a few words.
Let's get my glasses on. Dear colleagues and fellow veterans, family members, and yes, and also members of the committee and the organizers of today's event, and Rabbi Kafka. It is a great honor and pleasure for me to join you today on behalf of the Ukrainian American veterans from Post 26 in Washington, D.C., to honor the memory and sacrifice of those who fought and died in our nation's wars to defend our freedom, democracy, independence, and to preserve our human rights. Our post commander, Lieutenant Colonel Yaromir Orishkevich, was unable to attend today's commemoration and asked me to say a few words to you on this glorious occasion. He sends his sincere wishes and greetings to you. The Ukrainian American Veterans is a national organization which was founded in Philadelphia in 1948. It consists of about 30 to 40 chapters found in various cities in the U.S., especially in the Northeast region. Most posts were started by Ukrainian American veterans who returned home after serving in World War I. The mission of the UAV is to unite American veterans of Ukrainian descent and is pledged to uphold the Constitution and laws of the United States of America. Our UAV Post 26, which was established decades ago, sadly became inactive about 30 years ago until Dr. Oreshkevich attended a national UAV convention in Quantico, Virginia in the fall of 2021 and was asked and subsequently appointed, as he agreed, to be the new commander of Post 26 with the mission to reinstate the post in view of the impending Russian invasion of Ukraine and the need for possible assistance from our government in its defense. Since the arrival of the first Ukrainian immigrants in the United States in the late 1800s, they have loyally supported their adopted country in peace and war. Many first-generation Ukrainians and their sons and daughters served, suffered, and died in the defense of our great nation. In World War I, it is estimated that 30 to 40,000 Ukrainians served in World War I in our armed forces. Almost all were born in Ukraine and had immigrated as youths or young men. Ukrainian was their language and in some cases their only language. Ukrainians from New York State were drafted or volunteered and were assigned to the 79th Division. Those from Pennsylvania were assigned to a 77th Division. Many saw combat in Europe in the summer of 1918. Of note was the Polar Bear Regiment. For the first time in U.S. history, the U.S. Army containing Ukrainian American soldiers engaged the Red Army in combat. This occurred from September 1918 to May 1919. Hundreds of Ukrainian Americans from the Detroit area were drafted and organized into the 339th Infantry Regiment, which, together with the 1st Battalion of Engineers, were selected to deploy to Arkhangelsk, Russia, to seize this port along with the White Russians prior to the planned arrival of Allied forces. The real reason for this mission was probably to open up a new front for the Germans to deal with, thus weakening their ability to fight two fronts simultaneously. The 339th arrived in Arkhangelsk on September 4th, 1918, where they engaged in combat with Lenin's 6th and 7th Red Armies. Although this action did not end in success, this is the first time that the U.S. actively put boots on the ground against the Soviet Union. As Commander Yarrow would say, let's put Russian boots in the ground, instead of our troops from going there eventually or belatedly to save Ukraine and Europe from Putin's plans to reconstruct the Soviet Empire. Pretty well stated by him. The next reminder would be the input from the North Dakota Ukrainian American soldiers who were first to serve in World War II. Ukrainians first immigrated to North Dakota back in 1896, but they were among the first U.S. Army personnel to enter combat in World War II, when their now famous 164 Infantry Regiment joined the 1st Marine Division in the Pacific Theater after it landed on Guadalcanal on August 7, 1943. After several very bloody and deadly battles with the Japanese, the American forces defeated the enemy and planted the Star-Spangled Banner on the top of Mount Suribachi on the island of Iwo Jima. In the famous iconic photo taken by photographer Joe Rosenthal, one of the 6 flag raisers is Ukrainian-American Sergeant Michael Strank of Pennsylvania, who a few days later was mortally wounded by the Japanese artillery fire. He is buried in Arlington National Cemetery. In all, about 200,000 Americans of Ukrainian descent served in our nation's armed forces in World War II. Not as many as Jewish Americans, whose population at that time was about 4.5 million, about 10 times that of the Ukrainian Americans. Also, Ukrainian Americans were very well represented in the Korean and Vietnam conflicts, as we have proof with my friend and partner, colleague, UAVer, Walter Stepaniak, who is a decorated wounded warrior from the Vietnam conflict and is here with us. I'd like to ask you to stand up and let everybody know that you're here. Thank you for your service. And many gave up their lives in Vietnam. There was an interesting side thing. I don't want to try to bore you with the details, but it's a personal thing. And that's the Irpin, which is a suburb of Kyiv, Ukraine, 1993 military medical mission to newly independent Ukraine. When Ukraine declared its independence from the crumbling USSR in 1991, Ukrainian Americans, along with active duty and reservists, looked for opportunities to aid their mother country. Dr. Oreshkevich, a member of the DC Army National Guard, attended a January 22nd, 1992 dinner at the Fort Myers Officers Club. Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney was the main speaker, discussing the role of the U.S. Military in the post-communist world. Oreshkevich asked him, if the U.S. can send National Guard medical units and reservists to third world countries, why can't the U.S. send National Guard or reserve units to newly independent Ukraine? Cheney responded, I don't see why not. In 1993, an exploratory mission was sent to Ukraine, which resulted in a California National Guard humanitarian medical mission to the Kyiv region in October of 1993. The composite group of 35 health personnel from several states, including Oreshkevich and yours truly, arrived and are loaded with medical supplies and instruments C-141 cargo plane in Kyiv, and military and Ukrainian military and were met by our by personnel from the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv, as well as military and Ukrainian military government representatives. We were then transported by buses to the Irpin Military Rehabilitative Hospital, where we were provided with lodging and meals. Each of the 14 days that we stayed there, we traveled in 3 groups to the Kyiv Central Military Hospital, or to the community hospital in Kozelets, or to the hospital in Boyarka, where we saw mostly civilians, especially children. Ukrainian patients were delighted with the medical care we delivered, be it dental, visual, pediatric, or other. Each of the Ukrainian American participants in this mission was fluent in English and Ukrainian, and thus served as interpreter, as well as source of knowledge about Ukrainian history, culture, and its people. The improved relationship between the U.S. and Ukraine resulted in numerous other military medical missions over many years, as well as sea breeze to the Black Sea region or Yavoriv area for military training. Our current UAV post-26 activities. Since the start of Putin's horrific war against Ukraine in February of 2022, in which his armies seized additional Ukrainian territory in Donbass, which is the northeast region of Ukraine, the northern shores of the Azov Sea, think of the cities Mariupol and Melitopol, and Kherson in central southern Ukraine, and the bombing and missile attacks on civilian targets, schools, hospitals, churches, apartment dwellings, and home, and the horrific massacre of innocent Ukrainian civilians, women, children, and the elderly. As a result of this, our UAV chapter has joined the Ukrainian community in the Washington area in holding rallies in front of the White House, Lincoln Memorial, marches along the National Mall and Independence Avenue to implore the current administration to stand firm with Ukraine, increase economic pressure on the Russian Federation, and declare Putin guilty of war crimes, and for a government to give more weapons and military equipment to Ukraine's military to defend Ukraine's territory and to protect its people. We have also participated in front of the Russian embassy, the Russian ambassador's residence, and in front of the Russian press agency building to protest Putin's and his army's horrific genocidal attacks against Ukrainian civilians and Ukrainian POWs. We have also actively urged our congressmen and senators for their support of several bills that would send more aid as well as sophisticated weapons, Patriot missile systems, as Israel has, Abrams tanks and fighter jets to the Ukrainian military to defend the civilian population, territory, independence, and sovereignty. We believe that it is in our nation's vital interest to do so. Before ending my overly long speech, I would like to acknowledge the tremendous contribution of the Jewish American veterans to the defense of our United States, beginning with the Revolutionary War. And I'll just list something that really struck me very interesting. Haym Solomon's gift of $20,000 to George Washington to fund the final and deciding Battle of Yorktown, which resulted in the capitulation of the British rule of the colonies and the birth of the United States of America. That's quite an achievement. Jewish Americans' soldiers' service in the Second World War helped defeat Hitler and Nazi Germany, freeing the starving, emaciated Holocaust survivors from the Nazi concentration camps. Certainly a visit to the National Museum of American Jewish Military History under the auspices of your organization, JWV, in Washington, D.C. will be highly worthwhile and informative, and I am looking forward to actually making a visit there very soon. And we thank Joel Poznansky and his brother. Where is Joel? There you are. Is your brother Mark here? Okay. And his brother Mark for their tremendous work in organizing and delivering needed humanitarian aid to Ukraine. Thank you very much for that assistance. Both our organizations recognize the importance of defending freedom, democracy, liberty, and human rights everywhere, and it is our moral obligation to defend civilian populations against the type of brutal attacks, rape, torture, and murder as recently occurred in the towns of Bucha and the cities of Mariupol and other cities and towns in Ukraine. We humbly ask you for your support, humanitarian, political, and moral, in defense of Ukraine and its people, including its Jewish citizens, from the criminal attacks of Putin's troops. The Ukrainian military needs adequate weapons to accomplish this and is willing and capable to do this with their own soldiers given adequate weapons. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That would be wonderful. Okay. The cemetery will actually give us a tour. Thank you.
It's now my pleasure to introduce Vice President of the Montgomery County Council, Mr. Andrew Friedson. Andrew Friedson is the District 1 Council member, proudly representing Bethesda, Chevy Chase, and Potomac in Montgomery County, Maryland for his second term. He was elected in 2018 as the youngest council member in Montgomery County history and continues to make history as the youngest ever council vice president. He continues to serve the only place he has ever called home. He chairs the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee and serves on the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee. And something they didn't give me to say, however, is that for us, however, as members of the Montgomery County Jewish community, he will be remembered as the sponsor of the legislation that the Montgomery County Council officially adopted, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. Ladies and gentlemen, Councilmember Andrew Friedson.
Thank you, Sheldon, for that warm introduction, and thank you so much to Post 692 for welcoming me here today. I feel humbled to be the person speaking when there are so many people in this audience and on this proverbial dais who have sacrificed so much and accomplished so much. And I'm just really honored today to be able to join the members of the UAV and to show our solidarity with the Ukrainian people. My family traces back much of its roots to Ukraine, like so many American Jews do. And for the last 2 years, my family's Seder table has used Shemora matzah from Ukraine that were gifts to us, very warm and important and memorable gifts from Chabad of Potomac and Chabad of Bethesda that provided it to me and my family. So really humbled and honored to be able to join you today. And just as we join here at the JCC, this communal place, and we have this incredible memorial as a daily reminder of the service and sacrifice of so many Jews in so much of our country's history. I think about the bracelet that I wear, which is my grandfather's military ID bracelet. The front says Edward M. Friedson, U.S. Marine Corps. The back, with love, Janet, 1944. It was a gift to my grandmother when my grandfather went back to war. They were engaged and has stayed as a keepsake for me, and really a daily reminder of his commitment and of his service. Like so many of his generation, my grandfather's generation, the greatest generation, my grandfather had a really tough life growing up. The challenges of his childhood, compounded by the trauma of war, and by the way, he actually served part of his service in Guadalcanal, so I appreciated that story. He suffered much of his pain in silence, in what I believe, what my family believes, was undiagnosed PTSD. He never really spoke about his service, only his insistence that the atrocities of war scar everybody who is involved, the soldiers and the communities. And it was veterans organizations like this one that allowed my grandfather to find fellowship and to find community, solidarity with others who had a shared experience to his that our family and no family can provide. And I just want to thank you for that, because it was therapy by a different name, and so important to my grandfather and to so many other service members. So thank you for everything that this organization and so many other veterans organizations do for our returning service members. On this Memorial Day weekend, we honor the gratitude of the ultimate sacrifice paid by so many service members and their families. The empty chairs at countless barbecues, the flag-draped caskets of our nation's fallen heroes. We're reminded that we honor the lost by taking care of the living, the Gold Star families and the veterans who return with the physical and emotional wounds of battle. That is our obligation, and it's precisely what this organization does. And what I appreciate most about the Jewish war veterans is not only your work as one of the preeminent service-based organizations, veterans organizations in our country for so many years, so many decades, it's also the work to combat anti-Semitism, undeniably on the rise here in Maryland and even in Montgomery County. And I appreciate you noting the resolution that we passed at the county council, and there's a reason for that. It should disturb all of us that here in our inclusive, welcoming community, 85% of religious bias incidents target Jews, even though Jews only make up 10% of Montgomery County's population. From 2019 to 2021, reported anti-Semitic incidents in Maryland rose a staggering 175%. Parents have shared that they are considering pulling their children out of Jewish day schools for fear of being a target. Children report being afraid to openly identify as Jewish, whether wearing a yarmulke or even a mezuzah or a Jewish star. It's truly gut-wrenching to think that nearly 8 decades after the Nazis were defeated at war, thanks in no small part to the heroism of so many people who have been part of this organization, swastikas and Nazi symbolism still linger in our community, carved into classroom desks, spray painted on walls, distributed on leaflets, doorstep by doorstep, in our community. We find ourselves in a powder keg of conspiracy theories as anti-Semitism, the world's oldest form of hatred that is itself a conspiracy-based hatred, is exploding. We see it from elected officials who not only fail to repudiate it, but fan its flames. And we see it from celebrities too. Yes, let me be clear, anti-Semitism exists on the far right and the far left. Think for a moment that Kanye West, or Ye, has more than twice the number of Twitter followers than there are Jews on the planet. When Kanye West says he's going to go DEFCON 3 on the Jewish people, it matters. When he toils in centuries-old tropes about Jewish control and money, it matters. And when Dave Chappelle normalizes it on Saturday Night Live, it matters. In fact, several recent anti-Semitic incidents in Montgomery County have invoked Ye. The students at Whitman allegedly spoke about luring Jewish classmates to the deserted Andaman Islands, known for cannibalism, to burn them at the stake as Kanye West music played. In Gaithersburg, a Jewish man was assaulted to the point of losing consciousness as the perpetrators apparently shouted, "Do it for Kanye." And Donald Trump has nearly 6 times the number of Twitter followers as there are Jews on earth. When he says that there are good people on both sides, and when one of the sides is chanting, "Jews will not replace us," it matters. When he invites known white nationalists and Holocaust deniers like Nick Fuentes to break bread, it matters. When he encourages Proud Boys and other white supremacists to stand by and stand back while holding the most powerful position on earth, it matters. This is why we must unequivocally condemn anti-Semitism in all of its forms, and wherever and from whomever it manifests. That's why I introduced the resolution last July, which was ultimately approved unanimously by the County Council to address and combat anti-Semitism. Unfortunately, it was met with opposition. And though it was a painful process for many, including for me personally, the ultimate message of unanimous passage by the County Council was powerful and necessary. It's also why after the Tree of Life synagogue attack several years ago, I worked with colleagues, interfaith leaders, and the Jewish Community Relations Council to convene a faith-based security town hall, which ultimately led to the creation of nonprofit security faith-based grants for organizations at higher risks of experiencing hate crimes. That program, which is the first of its kind of any local jurisdiction anywhere in the country, has now reached $2.4 million, and I hope that we continue to fund it each and every year until it's no longer necessary, which I hope we find a day where it isn't necessary to fund security for organizations because they're at risk of hate crimes. But today, we must. It's also why we have led the annual Yom HaShoah commemoration, which recently took place last month, and heard from Holocaust survivors, most recently Lou Pohorilis, so that we never forget the atrocities of the Holocaust. As we remember those who perished and honored those who survived, we stood together in solidarity as a community to condemn anti-Semitism in all of its forms, to combat hatred and to repudiate genocide against anyone, anywhere, and to band together to fight the disease of indifference, as we said together, never again. And it's also why I am continually grateful for the unique partnership we have here in Montgomery County with the county government, Montgomery County Police, and and Montgomery County Public Schools with organizations like JCRC, the Jewish Community Relations Council, ADL, and AJC to respond to anti-Jewish hatred and bias incidents that are all too common and becoming more and more common, as we noted earlier. We will not accept or tolerate anti-Jewish hatred in our community and will not allow anti-Semitism in any of its forms to be normalized or to allow ourselves to be desensitized. We must continue to condemn all forms of hatred and bigotry and come together to make clear that hate has no place here in Montgomery County or anywhere. We must ensure that the painful story of the darkest chapters of Jewish and human history are both acknowledged and remembered. But combating anti-Semitism isn't just about responding to incidents and discussing when Jews are victims. It's also about celebrating our rich history, our traditions, and our contributions. So for the first time in Montgomery County history, I was very pleased to co-host a commemoration of Jewish American Heritage Month on May 9th. And it's why the work that this organization does each and every day to discuss the contributions of Jewish Americans is so critical. We honored the enduring story of Jewish Americans, our values, culture, and contributions that have shaped Montgomery County's character. Our story is too often lost, and that's why we must work intentionally to reclaim it. This is true in the dark chapters of history, when we forget the sacrifice of and threats against Jews. And it's true in the triumphs of history, when Jewish contributions are discounted altogether or eliminated, notwithstanding the note earlier. Like, as you mentioned, the role that Jews have played since the Revolutionary War, from the founding of this country. Take, for instance, the gun massacre at Tops Market in Buffalo, New York, a year ago this month. The gunman's white nationalist views, his specific targeting of people of color, and his violently racist manifesto was heavily reported. But what was not mentioned in media reports was Peyton Grendon's manifesto cites Jews as the biggest problem that the Western world has ever faced. Jews. And that he focuses much of that 100-page, violently racist document on anti-Jewish sentiments. Anti-Semitism, as it's been said, is the canary in the coal mine of global hatred. This is also true of the great triumphs of our nation's history, from the Revolutionary War and World War II and the Civil War and beyond. Throughout this country's history, and since the beginning of our tradition as a Jewish people, Jews have stepped up to serve and to sacrifice. Hineni, here I am, as Abraham said to God. And so many Jews offered to serve, to defend this country in war, like so many of you here today. Here I am, Hineni. This organization, the Jewish war veterans, emerged when many questioned whether Jews served in battle during the Civil War. And indeed, they did. An estimated 8,000 to 10,000 Jewish soldiers fought in the Civil War. While most fought for the Union, Jews largely assumed regional loyalties like the rest of the country, and about 30% or 3,000 Jews are estimated to have fought for the Confederacy. Jewish people were not only soldiers during the Civil War, but also assumed some of the most important leadership roles during the conflict, with 9 Jewish generals and 21 Jewish colonels. When we talk about the prominence of Jewish involvement in the Civil War, we would usually talk about people like Judah P. Benjamin, the first Jewish cabinet member in a North American government. His history is a complicated one. A close confidant of Jefferson Davis, he was considered the brains of the Confederacy, serving in high office throughout the war as Confederate Attorney General, Secretary of War, and Secretary of State. He himself owned 140 slaves. Yet, in 1864, as the South's military position became increasingly challenging, Benjamin publicly advocated a plan whereby any slave willing to bear arms for the Confederacy would be emancipated and inducted. He was among the first, if not the first, government official in the Confederacy to champion emancipation. On the Union side, we could talk about scores of Jewish heroes, like Brigadier General Leopold Blumenberg, who was severely wounded at the Battle of Antietam, or Brigadier General Frederick Neffler, son of Dr. Nathan Neffler, one of the founders of Indianapolis Hebrew Congregation, the first synagogue in that city, who himself led the charge at Missionary Ridge during the Chattanooga campaign, or Brigadier General Edward S. Salomon, the commander of the 82nd Illinois, which included more than 100 Jews at Gettysburg. But today I wanted to focus on a great story I read recently in the Washington Post about a Passover Seder of Private Joseph A. Joel and his Jewish compatriots. I'm not sure if anybody read this story, but in case you didn't, I'm going to tell you about it. Private Joel was one of 20 Jewish Union soldiers in the 23rd Ohio Infantry. Their regiment made its winter camp in the backwoods of what was then Virginia, now Fayetteville, West Virginia. The group of Jewish soldiers asked their commanding officer, who happened to be future President Rutherford B. Hayes, for time off to celebrate Passover. So on April 3rd, 1862, they created a makeshift Passover Seder. The 20 young soldiers split up time and tasks to prepare. Some worked on building a log hut, while others searched for what they would need to fulfill the Passover obligations and observance. The matzah had already been sent to them by a family member in Ohio, and so they went off to prepare for the rest of the Seder plate. For the bitter herbs, they took to the forest and picked some pungent greens. They got eggs from the locals in the village and a lamb from the regiment's sutler, who may have been Jewish himself. Cooking the lamb, they couldn't quite figure out which part was the shank bone. So they decided to cook the whole lamb and put it on the table so they could both eat all of it, indeed they were hungry soldiers, and make sure they got the right part to fulfill their Jewish obligation. As for the haroset, they couldn't find any edible replacements or substitutes, so they decided that because haroset was supposed to represent the mortar between the stones enslaved Jews used to build the pyramids in Egypt, a brick would suffice. So they placed a brick on their Seder table. At the time, he referred to it as Yankee ingenuity. I think we'd call it seichel. And of course, these were soldiers and it was Passover and they needed wine, 4 glasses a person. But they couldn't find enough wine to fulfill that obligation, so they substituted it with alcohol that they had readily available, hard cider. Soon the cider was flowing and the reclining and retelling of the story of Exodus turned a little more lively, and rather than telling the story, they started acting it out. And here they were, 20 young soldiers, acting like my nieces and nephews do, a play telling the Passover story, almost like children. And here we are in the darkest moments of war, where soldiers found comfort in their Judaism, in our tradition. With creativity and commitment, they found a way to observe in their own authentic way. On that April evening in 1862, Private Joseph A. Joel and his fellow Jewish soldiers told the story of perseverance and ingenuity of the Jewish people, not just in what story they were telling about our exodus from Egypt, but in the way that they were telling it and the obstacles that they overcome to continue it. This is how our rich tradition has endured through the centuries against impossible odds, l'dor vador, from generation to generation, in war and in peace, at home with family and in the backwoods with fellow soldiers. Am Yisrael Chai. Today, you are carrying on that tradition, honoring their legacy by ensuring that their story is told, and that our collective memory, their memory, and the memory of the Jewish people continues. As we fight to combat and condemn anti-Semitism, we come together to honor the traditions and contributions of the Jewish people, the men and women who have served to protect our freedom as Americans and our rights as Jews. To every service member who has stepped up to protect us, who has answered the call to service for the greater good with the centuries-old words, Hineni, here I am. Thank you. We stand on the shoulders of your sacrifice. We honor you, we remember you, and we are deeply, deeply grateful for you. Thank you very much.
We now come to the part where we're really sort of celebrating Memorial Day. I'm not going to ask anybody to stand because this will take just a few minutes more than some people can take, but I'd like to first call upon Mike Glick to begin the reading of the fallen. These are those American servicemen and women who have died since 9/11.
Specialist Daniel J. Agami, U.S. Army, Coconut Creek, Florida, age 25. Sergeant Howard P. Allen, Arizona National Guard from Mesa, Arizona, age 31. First Lieutenant David Bernstein, U.S. Army of Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, age 24. Corporal Albert Bitton, U.S. Army of Chicago, Illinois, age 20. Sergeant Aaron C. Bloom, U.S. Marine Corps, from Tucson, Arizona, age 22. PO Second Class Michael Brodsky, U.S. Navy, Tamarack, Florida, age 33. PO Third Class Nathan Bruckenthal, U.S. Coast Guard, from Smithtown, New York, age 24. Tech Sergeant Anthony L. Capra, U.S. Air Force, from Indian Head, Maryland, age 31. Sergeant First Class Christopher A. Sellis, U.S. Army, Somerville, South Carolina, Medal of Honor recipient, age 32. Corporal Ryan J. Clark, U.S. Army of Lancaster, California, age 19. Corporal Michael R. Cohen, U.S. Marine Corps, Jacobus, Pennsylvania, age 23. Second Lieutenant Seth J. Dvorin, U.S. Army, from East Brunswick, New Jersey, age 24. Lance Corporal Mark E. Engel, U.S. Marine Corps, from Centennial, Colorado, age 21. Corporal Mark A. Envin, U.S. Marine Corps, from Burlington, Vermont, age 21.
Private First Class Aaron Fairbairn, U.S. Army, from Aberdeen, Washington, age 20. First Lieutenant Daniel Farkas, from Brooklyn, New York, U.S. Army, age 42. Sergeant Zachary Fisher, U.S. Army, from Baldwin, Missouri, age 24. Specialist Jacob Fletcher, U.S. Army, Bayshore, New York, age 28. Specialist Daniel Freeman, U.S. Army, Cincinnati, Ohio, age 20. Specialist Douglas Green, U.S. Army, from Sterling, Virginia, age 23. Sergeant Foster Harrington, U.S. Marine Corps, from Fort Worth, Texas, age 31. Airman First Class Elizabeth Jacobson, U.S. Air Force, from Riviera Beach, Florida, age 21. Lance Corporal Jeremy Kane, U.S. Marine Corps, from Cherry Hill, New Jersey, age 22. Petty Officer Second Class Matthew Cantor, U.S. Navy, from Gillette, New Jersey, age 22. First Lieutenant Nathan Krisoff, U.S. Marine Corps, from Reno, Nevada, age 25. Staff Sergeant James Malakowski, U.S. Marine Corps, from Westminster, Maryland, age 25. Private First Class Deborah Noonan, U.S. Army, from Watertown, Connecticut, age 26. Specialist Levi Nuncio, U.S. Army, from Harrisonburg, Virginia, age 24. Corporal Michael Aremus, U.S. Army, from Highland, New York, age 21.
Staff Sergeant Robert J. Paul, United States Army Reserve, age 43, The Dalles, Oregon. Major Mark E. Rosenberg, United States Army, age 32, Miami Lakes, Florida. Corporal Dustin H. Schrage, U.S. Marine Corps, age 20, Indian Harbor Beach, Florida. First Lieutenant Rosalind L. Schulte, U.S. Air Force, age 25, St. Louis, Missouri. Captain Joseph W. Schultz, U.S. Army, age 36, Port Angeles, Washington. Captain Robert M. Secker, U.S. Marine Corps, age 33, Germantown, Tennessee. Specialist Mark A. Seiden, U.S. Army, age 26, Brigantine, New Jersey. Airman First Class Matthew R. Seidler, U.S. Air Force, age 24, Westminster, Maryland. Staff Sergeant Michael B. Shackelford, U.S. Army, age 25, Grand Junction, Colorado. Private First Class Stephen Shapiro, U.S. Army, age 29, Hidden Valley Lake, California. Sergeant Alan D. Sherman, United States Marine Corps Reserve, age 36, Brick, New Jersey. Chief Warrant Officer Alan Sherman, U.S. Marine Corps Reserve, age 36. Fort Riley, Kansas. Captain Benjamin A. Sclaver, U.S. Army, age 32, Medford, Massachusetts. Chief Warrant Officer Eric Smith, United States Army, age 41, Rochester, New York.
Private First Class Eric D. Sufrine, U.S. Army, age 20, Woodbridge, Connecticut. First Lieutenant Andrew K. Stern, U.S. Marine Corps, age 24. Captain Michael Y. Tarlovsky, U.S. Army, age 30, Passaic, New Jersey. Staff Sergeant Peter W. Taub, U.S. Air Force, age 30, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Private First Class Morris L. Walker, U.S. Army, aged 23, Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Specialist Glenn J. Watkins, Washington Army National Guard, age 42, Carlsberg, California. Technical Sergeant Timothy R. Weiner, U.S. Air Force, age 35, Tamarack, Florida. Sergeant Robert W. Wenger, U.S. Army, age 24, Round Lake Beach, Illinois. Specialist Jeffrey M. Wershow, Florida Army National Guard, age 22, Gainesville, Florida. Private First Class Colin J. Wolf, U.S. Marine Corps, age 19, Manassas, Virginia. Major Stuart A. Wolfer, U.S. Army, age 36, Coral Springs, Florida. Sergeant Elijah Taiwa Wang, U.S. Army, age 42, Mesa, Arizona. Specialist Benjamin Ben Yehuda, U.S. Army, age 24, Bogart, Georgia. Senior Airman Jonathan A.V. Yelner, U.S. Air Force, age 29. Lieutenant Miroslav Stephen Zilberman, U.S. Navy, age 31, Columbus, Ohio.
If you give me just a minute while I rearrange things, we're going to have the laying of the wreath and taps. please be seated. And as the last thing on the program, I'm going to ask the JWV Executive Director to please say a few closing words.
Thank you, Sheldon. I appreciate it. This is just one example of many examples of ceremonies that are happening across the country. I'm proud to be a leader at JWV and for JWV to have ceremonies like this to honor the fallen. It is a very solemn day, but it's a very important day because everybody who has fallen for our country has fought for the freedom. And yet the people here or the people across the country, we carry on their memories with us, each of us that have lost somebody over the course of time. So it's very fitting that on Memorial Day, we call on Americans to honor the fallen and remember the fallen. We also have what I call a very important message. We need to share that message with the young people of today so that they don't forget, so that they don't think of Memorial Day as barbecues and events and retail sales. The young people of today, so share it. When you talk to your young people, either your family members or when you go to school next week, if you're still in school, make sure you carry that message about the memories of the fallen and why we remember, because freedom isn't free.
Rabbi Kafka, benediction, please.
Elam alerachamim, shoychein abamim royimim, hametzei menucha nechoina, al kanfei hashechina, b'malois kedoshim tehoirim, Kizaya harakiya mazhinim Es nishmais chayalei tzevar tzais habris Shenaflo b'milchamais Bavo shonu mispalelim Leilu nishmaisayhem Began Eden, Began Eden, Began Eden, Te Menuchasam, Lochein, Balarachamim Yastirem, Mesezekin Afam, Leelamim, V'yitzer b'tzerachayim es nishmaisayim, Adinayu nachlosom, ve'anuach al mishkevoisom, ve'shalom, ve'noimar amen.
That, ladies and gentlemen, is our program. We will adjourn now. There are light refreshments in the back, but please stick around for Voices of Vets to entertain you. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you again, and we'll see you hopefully on Veterans Day this year, right here, same time, same place. Thank you.